Hello, my name's Tim Moore, and I'm more than just a travel writer, an Olympic gold medalist, and an astronaut. Although I'm not actually two of those things.
Well, I am sorry for your loss. I feel awful looking at that. I'm grateful but apologetic.
I've bought, read, and kept more of your books than anyone else in the world. And I think the only rival is Stephen Fry, but I don't have his number.
Really?
Yeah, I have followed you for over 20 years of your writing career, which means that, although I'm a fan, I've got questions. So I hope you're up for the challenge.
Oh, I left my book of answers upstairs. I'm sorry. I'll just have to make it up as I go along.
Well, like many people, I started off reading the bestseller, French Revolution, and it's a book about the Tour de France. And I'll tell a little history afterwards about how we got to meet because of this book. I bought it in Borders, which has now gone bankrupt in the UK and have closed down. But yeah, it goes to show that, your publisher didn't pay me. These are all genuine purchases.
I have to buy my own books off my publishers. That's how things have come to now in the publishing industry.
By then, I think you've already been a well-known writer, but the kind of lesser-known fact was what's leading up to that. So can you tell us a bit about how you've become a journalist?
Well, yes, it's it's kind of a triumph of serendipity and laziness and sort of rudderlessness. So I finished university. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. My parents had just moved from London to Bath, a very nice city in the west of England. Mm-hmm. So I went down there and literally hung around in their house for about a year. And at that stage, they were big travellers and they would go off for weeks on end, and I would just sit in their house feeding the cat and wondering what I was going to do with myself.
What did you study at university?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I had a slightly abortive experience at Oxford, so I was there for 2 terms doing modern history. But I've got a horrible feeling that I peaked intellectually and academically at the age of 17. So when I went to Oxford, I just found it. I can't do this. I can't work as hard as these people, and I can't produce academic work of the required standard. So I just got out of there after 2 terms, and my parents were obviously a bit upset about this. So I thought, well, okay, I'll have to better go and do something else at university. So what's the opposite of doing history at Oxford? So I did business studies at Sheffield. And I'm still not quite sure how that came to pass. I've never done anything remotely businessy in my entire life. There was an exciting moment after about 8 or 9 years after I graduated when I helped my dad make a spreadsheet, and I thought, oh, I'm using my the 3 years of knowledge I acquired at university there for the first and, as it turns out, only time.
Because I read about that in You're Awful. You said you spent 3 years in Sheffield, and so that was kind of in passing. I thought, well, why were you in Sheffield for 3 years?
Yes, maybe I didn't even specify I was at university then. Maybe you just thought I was living rough on the streets. I don't know.
Yeah, it was just one line.
Yeah. I just left it all to everyone's imagination. And my dad, who used to send a lot of mail shots out to kind of local newspapers and libraries about his little microfilm business, which is too complicated to explain, so I won't even attempt it. And he had a big directory called, I think it was called British Rates and Data. It was just a list of every single consumer publication and newspaper in the whole of the United Kingdom. And he also had a big drawer completely full of stamps, like they used to send out thousands of letters. This is clearly in the pre-email era. So I don't know. I just sort of thought, well, I could maybe because I used to write funny Christmas cards and things for my family, and which they used to enjoy. Just it was like almost like taking the mickey out of those round robin Christmas letters that people send to each other at Christmas. In fact, I was ahead of the game there because this is before people even did that sort of thing. Anyway, and my family used to enjoy them, and I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, is there going to be? Can I make a living out of writing funny stuff for other people? So I wrote a sort of funny column for a newspaper, a sort of facsimile column, and printed it on my dad's old dot matrix printer. I thought it would be more interesting to call myself Tim Moore. Didn't sound. I used my initials, my TSP Moore. I thought that sounds quite kind of imposing and grand. So I did this sort of mock-up of a funny column and sent it off to something like 580 different publications. I'm really sorry, Dad, that I used all of those stamps up. It absolute fortune in stamps. And okay, so everyone apart from about 2 people didn't even bother replying. A now defunct publication called Record Mirror wrote back to me and said, oh, well, we quite enjoyed that. Perhaps you'd like to write some stuff for us. So I started doing a TV review for this weekly music magazine. Then, of course, they also asked me to go and interview actual musicians, but I didn't want to say to them, you know what, I know it's just a happy accident that you happen to be, maybe they thought they were the only people I'd written off to, and I therefore knew loads about music, but I knew nothing about music. So I'd have to go to interview people, and I remember one particular occasion sitting in this record company office, and there was this is in sort of 1987 or something, so I was about 23. There was this band called They Might Be Giants, who were this sort of indie band, these two American guys. All I knew was they would because again, before the internet, it's quite hard to do that kind of research. I thought, I can't phone the record company up and say, sorry, I don't know anything about this band I'm going to interview. So I just all I knew, they were just 2 guys. Anyway, these 2 guys came into this office where I was waiting, and I stood up and sort of said hello and introduced myself and sort of trying to shake their hands. And they said, so no, we're just here to change the photocopier toner, just to get some sort of shifts on the Evening Standard in London, doing, again, similar kind of things involving interviewing lots of people. I remember interviewing Kylie Minogue and her sister Danny Minogue on consecutive days.
People kind of assume that if you are paid to be, reading and writing, it must be quite a kind of bougie job. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say actually, it seems to me that now actually that seems to be more the case. At least when I was, started out in journalism in the late 80s. Like I say, again, before the internet, newspapers used to actually make quite a lot of money, and therefore they would pay quite a lot of money. And I discovered, actually clearing out some of the files in our attic a couple of years ago, that I was getting paid more, because newspapers still have a funny habit of paying you per word. So how many words they commission, how many words they print, you get paid per word. And the word rate used to be around 50p plus a word, and now it's not. It's less than that, and that's in actual terms, and that's a decline, despite the fact that clearly things haven't got cheaper to go and buy, particularly in terms of property in the last 30. Not 40 years, anyway, almost 40 years. Oh my God. So it was an okay business to be in then.
But how did you get into travel writing?
Well, having just said, I did it all on my own, and I didn't have any support from the family in the way that you were suggesting is often the way now. Thinking about it, actually, I do owe it all to my grandfather, who was a journalist and was a foreign correspondent, and absolutely was obsessed with travel. He used to hate aeroplanes, so he always used to go around the world, even into his late 70s, 80s, mid 80s. He was still going on, kind of cargo ships and banana boats to go across the Atlantic because he couldn't bear the idea of flying. He drove his Land Rover to India via, Pakistan and Afghanistan when he was 73. Which I wouldn't want to do now, and I'm not quite 73. But anyway, so when he was still alive, but he sort of thought it would be nice to give a sort of to his grandchildren. He had 7 grandchildren. I can give all my grandchildren a sort of bursary which they have to spend on travel. They must go. It can't just be a holiday. They've got to go on a proper journey. So he gave us £3,000 each, and this was in 1990. So it was a reasonably decent amount of money. So I went off in 1990, and it was just after the Berlin Wall had come down. So my girlfriend and I at the time, who is now my wife, bought a really, really clapped out old car, an old Saab, and spent 3 months driving around what had until recently been, kind of closed off to the Western world, whatever it was, to all the old former Soviet countries, and it was fascinating. And on the back of that, I think again inspired by my grandfather, who, when he went off on his big long journeys, he would send the family these incredible letters. They weren't really sort of, it wasn't like it was travel writing. He would tell us like really funny stories of people he met, like weird food they gave him to eat, like amazing places he was staying at, all very journalistic and literary, really. Pages and pages and pages of them. I mean, some of these letters were like, 30, 40, very easy to take a little portable typewriter and type them all out with him. So I came back, and I guess in that sort of spirit, wrote a story and sent it off to a few newspapers, and it was the Independent, which doesn't really exist in that format anymore. It's called the Eye now. Published it, and I thought, well, that was easy. I didn't realise how lucky I was, and then literally on the basis of that one article, someone from a publisher, HarperCollins, in fact, just wrote me a letter saying, like, oh, well, that was, we enjoyed that. Well, what about writing a book? And it took me many, many years to understand how unusual and fortunate that was. That, I never had to sort of approach people and say, oh, what about this idea for a book, and be rejected over and over again. It was just, they approached me, and it did take me a few years, because I made the mistake of starting a family after that, and I thought, well, it's a bit, as you alluded to earlier, it's not necessarily the best paid business to be in. If I want to be a responsible father for my new family, I should probably go and get an office job. So I then went away, having had this exciting offer of like going away and becoming a travel writer. I'll tell you what, I'll go and work at Teletext, which used to be this sort of text-based pre-internet thing on your telly, and I reviewed video games for them for, 3 or 4 years. Like I say, it was fun. It was a bit like me and this other guy would sit in the corner of this enormous, very serious, open plan sort of media office, and we put up this big partition, and we were allowed to have this enormous TV because we were reviewing video games, and we did review video games. We also just used to watch loads of MTV and just be silly and throw things at people on the other side of the office. As a result of all those things, I did actually get sacked for just being repeatedly silly after about 4 years. Then got another job as a slightly more serious journalist, being a sub-editor. But then in the middle of that, I thought, well, do I want to do this forever? Or I thought, well, maybe I can make a living out of travel writing. And I did send off then a proposal to my old friend at HarperCollins, who had approached me to do a book, which turned out to be my first book, which was travelling up around the sort of up to the Arctic Circle and around there in the footsteps of this eccentric Victorian adventurer, because he spent a lot of time in Iceland, and my wife is Icelandic, so I have a sort of connection with Iceland. But that book, was sort of set the template. If I could follow someone else's journey and say, well, this guy went and did this, and compare and contrast my experiences with his and how things have changed, and so I'm viewing things through an extra set of eyes, which is always useful to kind of calibrate your own views of things. And so to some extent, every book I've done since then has, to one degree or another, followed that same kind of blueprint.
Obviously, a lot of people read Bill Bryson. I read Jan Morris because he wrote a book on Hong Kong. Paul Theroux, I think I had a kind of mini breakdown when I read one of his books, and he was kayaking, and I was, I think, doing lab work during my PhD, and I thought, why do people have such interesting lives and kayaking out in open sea, and I'm stuck here. So I think your writing is very different. How did you decide that you'll use a piece of history and actually live through that and physically have to do that?
As I say, it may have just been an accident that the first book I did happened to have because at that stage Iceland was not really a place that any travellers or tourists went to in 1997. So I thought, well, I need to have someone who's like, oh, and this guy, Lord Dufferin, was the first sort of non-Icelander really to go and write about it. And he was such an amazingly, and he read a little book about it, which was very funny, I have to say, for mid-Victorian aristocrat. He was a pretty funny dude, unexpectedly so, very light-hearted and slightly surreal. But at the same time, he was also incredibly brave to the point of foolhardiness. I mean, he was going in this tiny little wooden boat through icebergs and things. And I think I realised that, wow, this whole kind of particularly a pretty British thing about being this sort of explorers, really, and adventurers. And I am completely British, but wow, that's not me. I am so not a brave, foolhardy adventurer by inclination. So I think he was like, the sort of, well, he wasn't really my straight man, but he was like, I was trying to live up to him all the time and realizing I was doomed because I was a pathetic coward. In the first leg of the journey, I'm going on this container ship to Iceland and I just get really horribly seasick. And I think this is about as unexplorer-y as you can get. I'm just sort of sitting in this, my little, it was the radio controller's kind of cabin, I was lent to say, just sitting there for days on end, just being endlessly sick. And it was so pathetic and humiliating. But I think I just need this sort of, I'm the everyman. I mean, I think most people are not like Lord Dufferin. Most people don't just go, well, I'm just going to go up to the North Pole on my little boat. Most people are scared and a bit feeble and insecure. And I think that's me. And I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, I must present this as a story that everyone can relate to. I mean, it is a very British thing, this sort of self-deprecation and getting people to finding it funny that you are a bit rubbish. And I've been aware of the fact that I haven't sold all that many books in other countries, and I suspect that's partly because in countries, without wanting to generalise, as might be America, they have a much more kind of straightforward, heroic kind of view of things. And what do you mean? Like, you failed, you're a loser, what's up with you? And they don't get why that can be amusing to read about someone being a bit hopeless.
Well, you want to be the everyman's lens through this template of a journey, but actually you make your life more difficult.
Yes, well, that's absolutely the case. And I think what it is, it's like, I am viewing it through the prism of an everyman suddenly cast against his will, or in my case, completely through his own choices, into something that he's very ill-equipped to tackle. I realise once you've done something which is a little bit, you've bitten off a bit more than you can chew, and it's a bit too ambitious and a bit too difficult and a bit too dangerous, you can't then for the next book say, well, that was a bit too much, I'll just dial it down this time and do something that's easier. I realise you have to sort of step it up every time. So having done the first book, I did a little tiny bit of cycling where I went across, well, relatively speaking, it seemed like quite a big deal to me at the time, cycling across Iceland. And then when I came to do other books in which cycling was involved, obviously I had to up the ante, and I couldn't just, go down to the shops and back. I had to, I have to do the entire route of the Tour de France. And then once I've done one of those things, and then, there is also an element of the fact that, as you said earlier, that was the book that was commercially the most successful. So there was certainly pressure from my publishers to kind of repeat that formula. So I thought, okay, well, I don't mind. I quite enjoyed that. So let's do another book about cycling, but I've got to make it harder. I can't make it. It can't be less challenging. No one's going to want to know about that. So, all right, well, I'll do the Tour of Italy, but I'll choose the hardest ever Tour of Italy in history to retrace, the 1914 one, which 81 riders started and only 8 finished. And I'll do it on a 1914 bicycle as well. So I actually managed to find this 1914 bicycle, which had, wooden wheels and all that kind of stuff, no gears, and go off and ride, thousands of miles around Italy on this museum piece. And then with the old East German era Mifa going down the entire length of the Iron Curtain. Having a really fun, great, nice time is, for me anyway, and I think probably for most people, does not make for interesting reading. And if everything goes right, and that's why I actually, as a travel writer, I used to really dread it when people would commission me to go and write about a new, spa resort. Well, what can I say? This is nice. Yeah, it's really nice. It's like the other nice place I stay at, but maybe nicer. Maybe the swimming pool's bigger. So you need to. I mean, adversity
something to
is where.
overcome. I don't know whether you did it subconsciously or consciously, but it doesn't really start off inviting readers or new readers to read your books, because it only kind of occurred to me, when I look at this stack of books and when I look at the title, I think apart from French Revolution, a lot of them started off with the negative. So like you're awful. Unless you're really up for it, you're not gonna kind of pick this up. Do not pass go. So you're like, okay, right, don't. And then another fine mess, right? If I do some kind of adventure, then there are books like Travel with My Donkey, and you go, right, do I want to do that? Cyclists who went out in the cold. So it's like sieving out, it's like natural selection for your readers.
That's an interesting theory. I never thought about that before. I mean, it probably is. It certainly would not be a conscious thing, but maybe it is a subconscious thing. Maybe I'm just flagging it up as something that this book is going to be about, a grumpy man having a bad time.
If you don't like it, put it down.
Yes, maybe I'm setting that up in advance. I mean, obviously, in ultimately all titles, I mean, most of them, it's a sort of committee process, and you suggest things, and they say, but I mean, you're right. For instance, when you talked about that book I read about the 1914 tour of Italy, which in the end, okay, the title is Geronimo, which is again a bit of a laboured joke because the tour of Italy is called the Giro anyway. But I wanted to call it what the subtitle is. I wanted to call the whole book The Very Terrible Bicycle Race or something like that. Anyway, and which I still think would have been an okay title, but my editor said, like, no, you can't call a book that. And actually, I found a blog he wrote afterwards, but he was saying, like, sometimes like authors have really, really bizarre ideas about how to put readers off. And like, one of them, he wanted to call his book the Very Terrible Tour of Italy. So yeah, maybe I do.
Are you affected by bad reviews?
Yes. I mean, I think it's particularly, I mean, you sort of mentioned it a bit there, but it's particularly with stuff which is supposed to be funny. I realised there is no such thing as the joke which everyone will get. And, if you're in a room of people and everyone's laughing at something and you're not, you actually, it makes you a bit annoyed. So I thought, well, what's so funny about that? And you actually get a bit defensive and a bit angry. So I've realised reading reviews from people who haven't found my funny books funny at all. If it's, if you think it's said on the cover, this book is really funny, and you go, well, it's not funny at all. It actually winds you up. And I clearly, I think any author who says, oh, I don't mind about bad reviews, that's just plainly not true. I think it was my second book. And I remember reading an Amazon review on, it was Amazon.com, so American Amazon. And this is a book I did about, I was traveling in the footsteps of this slightly eccentric, well, completely nuts actually. He was like a court jester at the court of King James in kind of Jacobean England, just after the Tudor period. And he walked to Venice and back and wrote a book about it. Which was, called Coriet's Crudities. It was a funny book. He was a strange fellow. So I retraced his journey, and I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to walk to Venice. Can't be having with that. So what's a grand tour about? So I bought this really clapped out old Rolls Royce and drove it to Venice and back. And I remember reading this review, and it was just this man who was some Rolls Royce collector in America, who just wrote this really, really, really awful review with a 1-star review, but basically saying about how I hadn't been responsible enough and polite enough about Rolls-Royce and its tremendous motor cars, and I'd been a bit dismissive. Anyway, and how it was like, it was unfunny and childish and puerile and stuff. And I think for some reason I just took that really personally, and I did actually manage to it's really embarrassing to remember. I somehow, I'm sure they've obviously tightened things up, but he had his real name at the bottom of his review, so I sort of Googled him up in what passed for the internet at the time. This is like, 1998 or something, and managed to. I emailed him, but I pretended to. Because my son would have been 4 years old at the time. I pretended to be my son. I said, because it was just before Christmas, I said, "You have sent a sad review and you made my daddy sad at Christmas." I mean, it is actually, I'm really quite shocked at how seriously I took this. And of course, this guy then emailed me back saying, well, I'm sorry to have hurt your father's feelings. And then he actually, to be fair to him, he stuck to his guns. He said, but I didn't enjoy his book.
Have you met people around the world who tell you stories about their experiences reading your books and enjoy them?
Yes, well, it is. It's always very humbling, really, and I mean, particularly when I started doing books about bicycles. I think I just purely by accident, I didn't realise this was going to become a thing. But when I first did that book, French Revolutions, in the year 2000, it was just. I mean, I guess in a way, even though it's like, boo, here's Lance Armstrong, bad man, but he did suddenly make cycling into this, that kind of road race cycling into this huge global thing. And a lot of, middle-aged men in particular really got into cycling. And I guess because, some of them were middle-aged men and therefore they could relate to me as a middle-aged man tackling this gigantic Herculean task of riding the route of the Tour de France, but actually go to pieces and making a complete mess of it.
It was quite funny when people kind of see you in agony, when I think at one point you have to you're still in full gear, but then you were too tired to take them off and you have to shower in it.
Yeah.
It stuck in my mind, and yeah.
I've done that more than once actually, as it turns out. Because often because obviously you have to wash all your clothes every day at the end of a day's cycling, so that's two processes, and sometimes you're so tired of it, I'll just kill two birds with one stone here. I can stand up on my clothes, wash them, and then maybe take them off and wash myself as well. But I've discovered that I have, and I couldn't believe it, because as you say, I'm not as if I'm making these journeys out to sound in some ways in any way appealing. I mean, I'm making them sound pretty grim, but I have inspired, it seems, quite a lot of people. And the first time I remember, this is again going back to the sort of pre-internet era, people would actually write letters send via my publisher or my agent. I would get letters, people saying, I read your book French Revolutions, and I thought, I haven't actually ridden a bike since I was a kid, but I got the bike out and I went and cycled to Moscow and back or something. Just the incredible things. And this happens an awful lot. That when I go to book events, or people will get in touch with me on Twitter or something else and say that they have been inspired to do these sorts of things. I think also as I get older, the fact that I actually complete these journeys becomes more and more incredible to me that I managed to do it. So there is always a slight uplift in the narrative trajectory of it's more of a feel-good story now.
I don't know whether you know the full story about how I got in touch with you.
I don't think I do actually, no.
Yeah, because basically you were there in Hong Kong for one day,
yeah,
and then afterwards that was it. So I'll tell you a bit more.